Well, my name is Michael Gold. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to this seminar entitled Consultation in Germany and the UK, Past, Present and Prospects. I'm chairing the seminar on behalf of the Trade Union and Employment Forum, which organises under the History and Policy umbrella at the Institute of Historical Research at London University. And if you're interested in the work of the History and Policy, then go onto the website and you'll find all kinds of events that will interest you. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Philip Murphy and his team for all the technical work that goes on behind these events, without which that would not be possible. So thanks to you, Philip. This event concludes a series of 3 that we've had on consultation and its prospects in Europe. The first one was in May 2022 and looked at 20 years of the implementation of the Information and Consultation of Employees regulations in the UK since their implementation in 2002. The second one looked at the impact of Brexit on European Works Councils in Britain, and that was in 2023. And this one concludes by looking at the more domestic level of the prospects and future for employee consultation in the UK and in Germany. Our speakers are John Edmonds, and I'll introduce them in more detail in a moment. But we have John Edmonds and Ronald Staples and Michael Whittall, who will be speaking about UK and Germany respectively. But before I introduce them properly, just 1 or 2 small housekeeping issues. In case I have connection problems, then I will turn the video off and Sarah, who's the chair of the forum, will take over, hopefully, but I'm sure that won't happen. Please, if you haven't already done so, do mute your microphones because that prevents background noise and disturbance. Each presentation will last somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, which means we'll have a good amount of time for discussion at the end of the session. If you'd like to speak or make a contribution, then please either use the icon at the bottom, which allows you to kind of put your hand up, or if you're not very hopeful about doing that, just turn your video on or wave, and I will certainly see you and add you to my list of speakers or questioners. The meeting, as you'll realise, is being recorded, and I hope that's okay with everybody. If you have a problem with that, please let me know. And I think that's probably all the housekeeping. A particular warm welcome if you are from outside London or are not familiar with these seminars. Zoom, of course, does allow us to extend the attendance at these seminars quite dramatically, so that's always a good thing internationally. Now, let me introduce our 3 speakers, to whom we're very grateful for spending the time and travel in putting together their presentations this evening. First on, we have John Edmonds, who will speak on restricted rights or pragmatism, the search for an effective system of consultation in Britain. John is a trade unionist, General Secretary of the GMB Union, which was one of the 3 largest unions in Britain between 1986 and 2003. And was also a member of the executive of the European TUC, amongst many other roles. Together with Eva Tatchell, he's subsequently written 3 books on women's rights. And the second edition of the latest book, The Stalled Revolution, is coming out, I think, imminently. I think that's right, John, isn't it? And then we have Ronald Staples and Michael Whittall, who will follow on immediately, speaking on navigating co-determination in Germany's digital era between constraint and empowerment. Ronald previously worked as an actor in Vienna, Bonn and Marburg, and as a researcher at the Institute of Labour Market and Occupation Research at Nuremberg. He's currently at the Friedrich-Alexander University in Erlangen-Nuremberg, researching the transformation of work and co-determination, the relationship between innovation and organisation, and how digitalisation is changing organisations. And then, last but certainly not least, Michael Whittall worked as an industrial relations researcher at Nottingham Trent University, and then later, along with Ronald, at the Friedrich-Alexander University in Erlangen-Nuremberg. However, since 2023, he's been trade union secretary at IG-Metall, the German metalworkers union, and is extensively involved with employees at Siemens Erlangen. And his research focuses on similar issues, notably German co-determination, European Works Councils, and lifelong learning. So without any further ado from me, I think it's handing over to John. John.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. As you say, I'll be discussing the arrangements for consultation with employees in Britain. I use the word arrangements because there is no special system for consulting employees in this country. Indeed, there's nothing that could be properly described as a system at all. British arrangements in this, as in so many other things, are patchy, chaotic, and eccentric. I use the word eccentric because the arrangements are so noticeably different from what happens in many democratic countries. Typically, there are systems for consulting employees specified in country constitutions and in law. None of that in Britain. There's no system laid down in law which has general application, and except in a few limited circumstances like major redundancies, employers have no legal duty to consult their employees in almost all situations. Now, this is unusual, but it means that consultation only exists in Britain where an employer decides that such arrangements serve the interests of the company, or where a trade unions have forced the company to set up such a committee. That means in very many places there are no fixed arrangements for consultation at all. If it happens at all, it's entirely ad hoc, usually to deal with a specific crisis or with a particular conflict. This unsatisfactory, in my view, situation emerges directly, as you'd expect from our history. Throughout the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, the UK Parliament was completely controlled by landowners. Their unshakable belief, which in time spread to expanding industries through the Industrial Revolution, like mining, metals, and textiles, was that an owner had the right to exercise unfettered control over his property and employees. Indeed, in 1823, the Master and Servant Act was passed, which made it a criminal offence for an employee to disobey their employer. I mean, extraordinary arguments, extraordinary provisions. And during the 19th century, the only obligation that Parliament was prepared to impose generally on owners was to give a small measure of protection to working women and children. And even those measures were often greatly contested. Now, other countries, of course, have a similar history. But what distinguishes Britain is that there's never been a moment in the last 2 centuries where we've been forced to review our industrial practices in any fundamental way. As everybody knows, there's been no invasion, no revolution, no overwhelming military defeat, and most of the public institutions in Britain have remained intact. So whenever political and other groups were calling for radical reform, Britain always had the option of leaving the power structure unchanged. And regrettably, that was an option which Britain kept taking. On at least 4 occasions, maybe 6, depending on how you do the count, in the last century, there's been an opportunity for major reform, but on every occasion, radical change was successfully resisted by the industrial and/or political establishments. And Britain continued with its outdated and inadequate arrangements. The result is that, and there are lawyers present, they can, I hope, confirm this, that under British law, in general, the support goes to company owners or to boards representing those company owners to manage what most of us would say by edict, with little obligation to consult employees in any meaningful way and on a range of issues. Now, those of us in the trade union movement, of course, must take our share of the responsibility. In the late 19th century, when most of our major unions were founded, the new unions developed we'll come back to the third, two dominant principles. The first was that only trade unions should have the legitimate right to represent workers. And the second was that workers' interests are best advanced by collective bargaining. In fact, these principles became the orthodoxy of the British trade union movement, and they were famously endorsed in the Webb's pioneering book, Industrial Democracy. Now, this approach worked reasonably well during the period when trade unions were newly formed, and the focus was very much on building membership from very low numbers and improving basic pay. However, as everybody knows, times have changed, sometimes for good, sometimes for not so good. But the situation for trade unions, as with all social and political organisation, is how best to adapt to these changes. Well, I'll make a big generalisation here, but nowadays the work of union members obviously is markedly different from what it was a century or more ago, but significantly, and here's the generalisation, the aspiration of workers now seem to go deeper and wider. Employees want to know more, feel entitled to know more, and want to have a much greater say on the subject of what their employer is planning. Of course, the two founding principles that I mentioned still have relevance. We need to extend collective bargaining, and negotiations are taking place at this very moment, I hope, with the British government with that objective. And of course, we continue to value the single channel of representation going through trade unions. But the unpleasant truth is that if we continue to bind ourselves to these principles rigidly and without modification, we are apt to cramp our policy making and putting a limit on our success. Looking back, our commitment to collective bargaining was, of course, never intended to mean that we should always give pay negotiations, important as they are, an overwhelming priority over other trade union work. But that's the way it's often turned out. For decades, British trade unions have been seen by the media, by politicians, and by the general public to be about pay claims, and except where we face major closures, not a lot else. Too often, other issues, even if they're of deep importance, great importance to our members, tend to be squeezed out. Recent disputes illuminate the process. The striking workers, and we had a number of very important strikes in Britain some months ago, the strikers wanted their pay to match the great surge in inflation, or better still, to exceed it. But the strikes on the railways, in the health service and in education were never just about money. Unwanted changes in train and station management, massive staff shortages in health, excessive bureaucracy, and unreasonable levels of inspection in education were all of great importance to union members, and in some polls showed that they were at least as important as the pay claim being settled. Nevertheless, the public focus was always on the pay claims and the size of the offers. And here's the rub. In each case, once the pay issues were agreed, there was enormous pressure to call off the strike. And in each case, and I've checked in the last 2 weeks, the disputes ended without the non-pay issues being brought to an agreed conclusion. Now, this tunnel vision is partly caused by the dearth of expert knowledge in the media and sadly amongst many politicians. But we have also to accept that the deep structural problems in British industrial relations encourage that focus on pay at the expense of other matters. In almost every industry with unionised workforce, there are systems for pay negotiations. Of course there are. But for reasons I've already explained, arrangements for dealing with other matters are usually absent or rather feeble. This structural failure needs to be rapidly corrected because at this moment we face two monumental challenges, and so far our response has not been very reassuring. The first is the transition to a green economy. We've developed a raft of policies to ensure, if implemented, that workers are treated fairly. However, so far, we've failed to persuade many companies to commit to what we call a just transition. Alongside that challenge, and you'll hear more about this from other speakers later, is the urgent need to develop plans to protect the many workers who feel and are threatened by the helter-skelter pace of technological change. Now, these issues are complex, and in most companies, we have what I think is no effective means of dealing with them. I mean, we can follow the usual British practice of asking for special meetings with management, but those meetings tend to produce many questions, a list of reservations, and often, sadly, a tedious debate about attendance and procedure and how many further meetings there will be. Much time will be wasted, and we'll end up chasing after the problems rather than anticipating them. A standing committee with agreed membership and established procedure is so much better, and we all know that. And that's the yawning gap in British industrial relations, which we must find a way to fill. Of course, a consultative committee will only be taken seriously if it has authority. Voluntary bodies in this area tend not to be much respected. We need to create committees with powers guaranteed by law. A little bit more history. 50 years ago, the then Labour government set up an inquiry into proposals to make British industry more democratic. According to its chair, Alan Bullock, the German Works Council system was considered very seriously, but it was not recommended to the British government because, as we know, a key element in the German system is that all workers, union members and non-members, have a vote in Works Council elections. And Bullock was told that this conflicts with the trade union principle that worker representatives should only be elected by union members. And he was told that if that system was introduced or he recommended it, it would be outright opposed by the TUC and by member unions. Well, that obstacle, the commitment to the single channel of worker representation through trade unions, is still with us. Of course, in your dreams, it could be resolved if we could persuade a British government to give legal backing to consultative committees elected only by trade union members. Unfortunately, and here I use understatement, I very much doubt that we could win that argument with any party that's likely to be elected in the next few years. So I don't think there's any alternative. A choice has to be made. British trade unions can either stand by that traditional principle of excluding trade unionists and stressing the need for a single channel of representation, or we can opt for consultative committees on the German model with legally backed rights and authority. When the Bullock inquiry was sitting in the 1970s, the choice was fairly easy. British trade unions had over 10 million members. It went up to much higher than that. And shop stewards committees were often strong enough and had the power to influence management decisions. Now, we all know that 50 years on, the choice looks very different. Trade unions are weaker, and most members only have a forlorn hope of winning by local negotiation the influence which many workers in Europe are guaranteed by law. The balance of advantage has shifted, and has shifted a long way, and it shifted in favour of adopting a system like the German system. Of course, as many people would say, works councils do not come with some magic wand. Getting the council set up and using them to full effect will be arduous, and the results may often be disappointing. And I saw our German colleagues will give us a few examples of that. But the truth is that the status quo in Britain is just not meeting the needs of British working people. And introducing something like works councils provides the best opportunity I can see to create a stronger and more secure role for worker representation in Britain. So in my view, that's the choice we ought to make. And in my view, we ought to get on with it. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, John. That was a very succinct overview of, I think, the position in the UK. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to Michael and to Ronald on the grounds that there may be questions for all three speakers. Rather than having questions now to John, we can consolidate them at the end for all three speakers. So without further ado, Michael and Ronald, if I can hand over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I will start and Michael will continue. We will share my screen, and then everything will be much easier for you to follow. So now you should see what I'm talking about. We will shed some light on a research we did recently and Michael will follow up with some, let's say, practical efforts he's currently doing. I will talk about a project. Sorry. I'm a bit irritated. So I will start with findings of a recent project which Michael and I conducted together, and afterwards he will present his late-breakingly efforts in organizing and collective bargaining. And we will concentrate, especially in the findings of the project, we will concentrate on works councils. So this is kind of connection to what John Edmonds said. Yeah. And first of all, what are recent developments around works councils in Germany? Michael, you can always correct me if there is something wrong with what I'm talking about. And as you all know, works councils are the special ingredients in German industrial relations. And they are rooted in the Works Constitution Act, and every company with more than 5 employees can legally constitute and elect a works council. The law itself has seen several revisions. Most important may be last one in 2021 under the impact of the corona crisis, when the rights of works councils to have a say in matters like mobile work, implementation of AI systems, or digitalized decision-making was legalized. However, the challenges for co-determination and works councils remain huge in Germany. The responsibilities increase. It's getting more difficult to assert collective interests, and democratic legitimization of works councils is declining. We can see this by that even less employees are represented by works councils currently, and that the electoral participation has decreased the last. Let's see what's going on over the next elections. In a more general perspective, we also see shifting boundaries within industrial relations. And for our project, we were working with a model proposed by Helmut Titel, who tried to show in an idealized way industrial relations in Germany as a kind of quadripartite model on the left, and as a tripartite model on the company level in the middle, which shows the kind of the stable institutionalized industrial relations in Germany. But the threat for co-determination lies in a potential shift of these institutionalized relations in which the Works Council could be marginalized. And possible reasons are, as mentioned, individualization, changing management principles, and last but not least, the use of digitalized communications tools and strategies. And this kind of observation was a starting point for our project, and this was conducted, and it was called Paradigm. I won't explain the acronym. It's long and German, and I won't do it. But it's about participation and digitalization. Project was conducted from autumn 2018 to 22. And finally, we published our results in a book, see it on the right. And if everything runs smoothly, the English translation will be printed late this spring. We were a team of sociologists, business information scientists, and HR management scholars, which is a quite unique combination. And we had a simple question at the beginning. What digital communication tools are used by works councils and for what purpose? And how do employees participate in co-determination processes? And we conducted 6 in-depth case studies, doing a total of 78 interviews and participant observations of participatory events. These are the sunglasses on the picture. The dominant branch we observed was manufacturing due our contacts to IG-Metall, but we also had IT consulting firms and some service companies like in telecommunications. So due to the time restrictions, I will skip the methods section and jump right into our findings. If there are any questions, maybe we can discuss them later on. And of particular importance to us is the realization that in all cases, we found something like what we called Ungleichzeitigkeit seemed to be at work, and there isn't a direct translation for this term. It's kind of a neologism we invented, but can be transcribed, so to say, as non-symmetrical forces or A/synchronicity. So it has to be something to do with time, but it's not only time. But it's try to explain it. What did we mean, or do we mean by Ungleichzeitigkeit, and where did we detect it? While interpreting our data, we realized at first that it was quite hard to group or cluster our cases, because at first sight they seem to face similar challenges, as mentioned before. But if one zooms in, or if we did zoom in, the differences in the modes of action and strategies of the works councils grew and grew. And finally, cum granusalis, we could put up 2 clusters, which we named tradition and production on the left side, and digital services and communication on the right. And we also have what we call the abandoned unicorn in the corner. This was the case that didn't fit anywhere. What's different between the 2 clusters are the effects of the so-called Ungleichzeitigkeit or non-symmetrical forces. And with this term, we want to point out that in collaboratively organized companies or organizations in general, specific rhythms of work emerge. You all remember E.P. Thompson's work on time, I guess. These rhythms are aligned with the subject of work, and therefore the rhythms are at an assembly line are different than those from a sales department, for example. But also works councils establish such rhythms on their own, accordingly to the rhythms of their company. And the funny thing is, we recognize that these rhythms can intensify or level inequalities in the company and for co-determination. So we situated these effects within 3 dimensions, 3 dimensions of meaning, as Luhmann says. Temporal, obviously, this means structures of decision-making itself. For example, the official response time for works councils in Germany for requests by management is 8 weeks. This structures the whole sequence of requesting and answering in many companies in Germany. Factual dimension, this means something like new business models or new invention of new technologies or implementing new products. And last one, social dimension, this means, first of all, hierarchy and the culture of co-determination, which is closely linked with hierarchy. And even if works councils do not have an official hierarchy, a disciplinary hierarchy, it turns out that they institutionalize hierarchies in a kind of traditionalizing modes of working together. Within our clusters, the manufacturing cluster is the one that has a kind of mature co-determination, which means decision-making processes are bureaucratically organized towards management, but also within works councils as co-determinational body. And we observed in this cluster the mere speed, density, and volume of digitalized communications was perceived usually as overwhelming. So, and what it means that these works councils usually didn't use these tools intensively. And what we also observed is that the different parts of the workforce in these companies had more or less access to digital communication. And which means, for example, that workers at assembly lines, we were also in an automobile manufacturer, and these workers didn't have an official email address. So they didn't get all the information that was normally sent to the rest of the workforce. And overall, one can say that the management appeared to be much more accessible for the workforce than the works councils. And this was because management was visible on the intranet and the other information tools used in the company. On the other side, we have a smaller cluster, digital service and consulting, where industrial relations are rather characterized by conflict These two cases are similar in tackling all the aforementioned challenges creatively. And therefore, they have the chance to change the mentioned effects of Ungleichzeitigkeit. Consulting, for example, situated in Berlin, was a newly constituted works council, and they set up a rule, one of the first things to do, that whatever request from management is made, they coordinate digitally, ideally within hours, and to make decisions and respond as soon as possible. And this behavior, or this rule of behavior, put the management under enormous pressure. And digital service company, on the other side, acquired design thinking skills, so to say, creative management technique, to be able to enact solutions for challenges the company had to face and didn't tackle by themselves. So the Works Council of Digital Service Company appeared as a new actor that is not only protecting the workforce, employees, but also an active and enacting player in the company. And the abandoned unicorn, last example, is a sad example for a works council that is formally institutionalized and accepted in the company, but it was not able to act as a body. Works council was spread across different sites, but that was not exceptional in our sample. But we were not able to establish and use digital communication strategies to coordinate themselves. And finally, this works council got sort of decoupled from its constituents and the management. So this was really a really quick, dirty run through to the project and our idea of what Ungleichzeitigkeit means. And I'm sorry for that, but if you are interested in this concept of Ungleichzeitigkeit, I found out that I have got a recorded version of a previous talk where the concept is explained a bit more in detail. So, and I will paste the link in the notes. So if anyone is interested, feel free to click the link. Before I'm handing over to Michael, some possible trajectories stemming from our findings. And I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of acceleration by Hartmut Rosa, but much of the changing of work, the world of work we see right now has to do with acceleration in his sense. And if you want to have successful, powerful work councils and co-determination in the future, there are some things to do. And first thing, in my opinion, I hope Michael will agree, is that works councils have to untangle their micropolitics in their bodies. They must develop and maintain digital communication competencies, which is a major challenge if you think of recent developments in AI, for example. And this is something I would say John had also implicitly in his talk, that co-determination is more than representation, and that bodies of co-determination have to take it seriously that employees want to have a greater say in their work life and in their forms of representation. So that's my part. Thank you very much. From the project, and now Michael will tell you something from his current project with IG-Metall and Siemens, where we do many things in the right way, I would say. Okay, Michael, you tell me when to click. And you have to unmute yourself.
It's really nice to participate in this. As most of you can gather from my name, I'm a Leicester boy, born and bred in Leicester, and have lived most of my life in Germany, majority of my life in Germany. What I want to do in the next sort of 10, 15 minutes is take you on a journey. And the journey really is building on what Ronald or what we did in the project, which Ronald just talked about. And one of the things that I'm focusing on here is showing how we've quite successfully moved from and taken works councils with us, and also shop stewards committees with us, from focusing very much on using communication in an analog form, but more in a digital form. And the reasons for that is the IG-Metall, like most trade unions today, have two major sort of hindrances, if you like. One is a lot of the people that we actually represent no longer have a workplace, or they are mobile. That means most of them work from home. So the usual access that we would have to them, either as a shop steward or as a works council member, is limited. The second thing, and this is a major challenge for the IG-Metall, and that is that we are seeing a major decline in blue-collar workers. So if you like, the bedrock of our trade union is declining in front of our eyes every day. And if you like, the white-collar section is increasing, and that is requiring us to actually reconsider how we run campaigns. The main thing that I point out there is we had a recent strike last year, collective bargaining round. We can usually in factories still organize employees to take part in strikes. In the Siemens world, which is predominantly now white collar, it is a major challenge for us. Yeah. And in that way, we are forced, if you like, to consider new forms of actually pressuring management, forms that go beyond strikes. And one of the things that we use here to do that is using digitalization. So I'll go on to that. Ronald, we're dividing the work here, I believe. Yeah. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit of an insight what we're talking about here, there is something called the Siemens IG-Metall team. The Siemens IG-Metall team is made up of 15 people. The Siemens IG-Metall team has a central team, which I belong to, and it's quite a unique, if you like, we are the unicorn in the IG-Metall. No other company has a group of representatives which just focuses on the IG-Metall. And the reason for that is, often many of you will think of Volkswagen, BMW, the automobile industry. But inside Germany, Siemens has many different facets. There are many different Siemens. Siemens itself, Siemens PLC, employs about 50,000 employees in Germany, but we also have mobility, Healthineers, and so forth. And they are connected, but some parts of the Siemens world, like Siemens Energy, has nothing to do with Siemens anymore. But the focus here is that we do have a lot of resources, yeah, and we have a lot, if you like, not only resources, but a lot of people who are bringing a lot of experience with them in terms of organizing campaigns, modern campaigns, which aren't focusing necessarily on a strike movement, which a collective bargaining campaign or movement requires. Yeah, I'll go on to look at the issue at hand very quickly, what the negotiations are about, and then I'll go through, if you like, and give you some idea how we successfully have used digitalization and different forms of social media to actually organize, if you like, a virtual campaign, and a virtual campaign in a way that we're able constantly to increase pressure that we're putting on the board, the Siemens board here in Munich. Okay, Ronald, next slide. I do apologize here. And John will know very well that trade unionists, I've changed 1.5 years ago from the academic world into the trade union world, have no time. And my days are very, very long. And so most of the slides I was able to actually translate into English. But some of them, I just didn't have the time to do it. So please accept my utmost apologies there. I can break this down for you. I mean, what we have in the Siemens world, we have about a quarter Yeah, a quarter of the German workforce who actually are not covered by the National Collective Bargaining Agreement, which can be traced back to 1984 with the major strike that we had there over the 35-hour agreement. The people who work, and you'll see here a nice little map of Germany here, the different cities which are being referred to, right in the top northeast of Germany, you have Kiel. Right down in the southwest, you have Flensburg. Between Kiel and Flensburg, you have 39 sites, employing around about a quarter of Siemens PLC's workforce. It's around about 15,000 employees that we're talking about. Those 15,000 employees were forced into what we will call concession bargaining some 20 years ago. Siemens came to the IG-Metall and said, look, we've got these 39 sites. They are competing with small to medium-sized companies. We're not profiting from their use, and we're thinking about closing them down unless we come to an agreement on this. And what we entered was an agreement which ensured that they left the national agreement. That means they are not covered by what is called the Flickentarifvertrag. They're covered by their own agreement, and this is called the TVS-Val. It means a Tarifvertrag special agreement, although the inside joke of the Siemens employees covered by that, they use the S to say it's a Scheiße agreement, which obviously translated to German to English means a shit agreement. But the employees working under this particular agreement work 37 hours a week instead of the 35-hour weeks, and they earn between 10 and 20% less than the other 75% the other 75% of the workforce. And it's quite a strange situation. For example, I'm based predominantly in Erlangen. Erlangen employs in the region with different sites altogether, about 50,000 employees there. It is, if you like, Erlangen is now the Siemens city. We have on the Siemens Promenade, which the IG-Metall has an office where I'm based. We have 4 different parts of the Siemens company, and 3 of the parts actually fall under the national agreement or the regional collective agreements, 35 hours a week, whereas one section of the Siemens population within Erlangen fall within this what is called a special agreement signed 20 years ago. Things have changed fundamentally, and to the benefit of the IG-Metall and the workforce of what are called Niederlassungen, these 39 sites. One is we have a very restricted labor market, so companies are competing for labor. That's a benefit for us. The other thing is the markets have changed drastically now. The markets for the workers working in these areas, they predominantly install automation systems and actually keep them going, not only within Siemens, but around the world. So it's a very profitable market here. So the market situation has changed from 20 years ago. The next slide, Ronald. Okay. Now we're coming into, if you like, the question of organizing, and the focus there is that we have created, and they have to be very, very careful, because organizing is a system which is bottom up, not top down. What we did at the beginning, we set the framework as a trade union. We put in place mechanisms with which employees could interact together and decide what the campaign should be themselves. But it is very much based, and has been very much based on using digital technology, which we have at our disposal. So, for example, what we did initially was we had an online event. It's called a collective bargaining talk, mainly of the works councils from these 39 sites that I mentioned, and the shop stewards represented in these particular sites, but also people like myself. So I'm called a political secretary. That means that I am the representatives of the employees with Erlangen. We invited those too, and we posed a question to them. I've left that nice German word there, zeitgemäß. Yeah, it's in the English language as well. And we said, is the current agreement which we signed 20 years ago, yeah, is it still valid? Yeah, that's the question that we posed. Yeah, we did it in I would say in an aggressive way. We posed it in a way to actually make the representatives and members, and also non-members as well, to actually ask themselves, are they happy with the current situation? Have things changed? Yeah. Next slide, Ronald. What we also did at the very beginning, and this is something that we needed to actually ask them, and the employees and the members of the IG-Metall are working at these 39 sites, and the Works Council is representing, majority of whom I have to say, I think all 100% of the 39 are run by the IG-Metall. That means the chairperson of that Works Council will be an IG-Metall member. Yeah. What we actually did was we said, this collective agreement is going to be quite different. Yeah. In the past, and here I'm saying again, we're dealing with predominantly people who are working in white collar sections. In the past, most Siemens, it has to do with the Siemens culture. The Siemens company and Siemens representatives in the past have bought in very much into the German social partnership. Yeah. Which means that it's been very difficult to get them out on the street and strike. So we knew if we're going to call a strike, we're not going to get the backing that way. We also had to inform them that in opposite to other like national agreements, we can rely on employees in Ingolstadt where Audi is based, or BMW, or Knorr-Bremse, or even Siemens Mobility, because there was a lot of production sites, say in Krefeld and Munich. Usually they go out on the strike, and if you like, they're the backbone of a collective bargaining campaign or round of negotiations. But in this case, we quite clearly said, we're on our own here. It's down to you whether you want to do it. Yeah. And one of the things that we pointed out to them from the very beginning, the IG-Metall does not go begging. Yeah. That means if you want this, and we were trying to create, if you like, a cultural change in the mindset of the Siemens employee, the white collar employee. Next slide, Ronald. So what do? We asked a question. We had constant online collective bargaining talks where all 39 sites sent representatives online. We had a questionnaire to ask them whether they thought that the current agreement was valid, up to date, zeitgemäß. And lo and behold, 95% of the people who participated in our online talks said that no, the TV-SV is no longer representing the economic situation which they were faced with 20 years ago. So there's been a fundamental change there. Next slide, Ronald. So we get to an interesting point here, and if you like, this was the stage in the agreement or the campaign for me, which has made it a success so far. Yeah. And as you quite quick just hear, so far we haven't reached an agreement. We're very close to reaching an agreement. Yeah, we have an acceptance by management that we will sign an agreement by July. We're actually in negotiations on that. But the key thing here was we held a seminar, yeah, a workshop seminar which we called the Kickoff. Again, represented all 39 sites were represented by the works councils, also by their shop stewards representatives. And we used a schooling platform online again, where we actually set if you like, outlined what the different stages were being. Firstly, okay, if we're going to launch a campaign, how do we get people to commit to this campaign? How do we actually ensure that if not only you commit to it, but you actually participate in a virtual campaign? Because we are talking about a virtual world here in the way that we're organizing that. And what came out of that was the following, and this is a key slide. These 2 days were key in the success of the campaign so far. Next slide, Ronald. Okay, again, my apologies. I didn't have any time here, but I can go through, if you like, the headlines and if you like, the parameters which were negotiated, debated over these two days, and actually set out what the fundamentals of this campaign are about. Yeah, and if you like, trying to create a narrative, not only which the works councils would go along with, but actually go a step further, where the works councils could actually get the workforce support in this. And the first thing that needs to be considered is, and it's keine Zweiklassengesellschaft, it means within the Siemens world, as I pointed out at the very beginning, 25% of the workforce, lives experiences a two-class system. They work 37 hours a week, not 35. They earn between 20 and 10% less than their colleagues directly opposite in another factory or offices opposite there. So first thing we said that this two-class system is not right. The next thing we wanted equal treatment. So we had, if you like, these are words that we were using to actually reach out to people and get them behind this. The other which is something I'm quite proud of, because that's something I contributed into the negotiations or into the schooling, was genug is genug. Enough is enough. It's 20 years of exploitation, being a member of a two-class system. Some people even refer to it, and you have to be careful with this, that there was an apartheid system within the Siemens world in Germany. Okay. The key things, though, and this is quite clearly what the IG-Metall tried to do. We set the snowball in process. The members themselves took it over, and the works councils and shop stewards took it over. But we did this, and we said to them, okay, we're willing to continue to offer the framework to this, expertise, help you, support you in whatever way we can. If you like, bring the technical tools in social media that we have at our disposal. As most of you know, the IG-Metall is a relatively well-resourced trade union in the world. One of the things that we said was a key thing that we need from the employees and works councils is, and it comes to this here, nicht ohne dich. And if you like, that's a key concept of organizing. And translating into English, it means we will only do this with you. We won't do it without you. And that message is, it's your campaign. It's a grassroots campaign, which you have to actually take by the my English, let me down. You have to take responsibility for this. The other thing we did, and this was a great negotiation and discussion. The IG-Metall said, "We'll support you. We'll give you the resources, but we want to experience, okay, or ensure that when the first half year of the campaign, we have 1,000 new members. 1,000 new members. That's a big number within 6 months. In predominantly sites which are white collar. Next slide, Ronald. Okay, this if you like, some people from the eastern part of Germany, some of the sites said they called this Sozialistischer Wettbewerb, so competition. In the past, there were sites who would actually compete against each other in the former East Germany. And we did that as well. We said it was healthy. And you'll see here a collage of different sites. And what we would do here is we would have little events, flash mob events, which would take place at dinner time. And we would actually upload these onto our team site. We had a team site for the campaign. And what it was doing was encouraging. So what would happen is Erlangen would have the whole of the shop steward committee going out with employees, taking photos in front of their offices, posting them online, and the next day Hanover would see that, said, "Oh, we're going to top that, we're going to beat that." And it was healthy, but there was competition in there. But we were flooding, if you like, the airwaves or the digital airwaves with pictures and, if you like, a narrative, which actually people ran with. Next slide, Ronald. Okay. So this was a big turning point. We have creative people with the IG-Metall. You will see there's a puzzle here, a jigsaw puzzle. This jigsaw puzzle is 3 meters by 2 meters. The pieces are like this. Each works council was sent this puzzle. Each works council had the task of putting it together. You'll see here a picture here, and that is my works council in Erlangen, the site that I actually represent. And each works council had the task of going through amongst the workers and the workforce and getting people to sign it. And we called this the commitment puzzle. And we said, if we get 39 sites that commit themselves to actually this campaign, then we'll run with it. Then we're in a position to actually get somewhere. And I found it quite interesting that what John was saying about the British system, because you'll see here to the right, there's a triangle there, and the triangle there is, if you like, the strength of the dual system of industrial relations. Yeah, we have here the Works Council. Yeah, we have here the employee representative from the IG-Metall, that in my position. We also have the local IG-Metall office in Erlangen. And this structure is responsible on the ground in the different cities to ensure that the campaign is carried constantly. Yeah. What's interesting here was the strength of ours. It wasn't initially a strength. We could talk about the history of the dual system, how it came about. But we do have members here. So if you like, if you look at the representatives of the Works Council here, they are all members of the IG-Metall. I even sit in on Works Council meetings and participate in them. Okay, next slide, Ronald. Okay, the other thing was, and here again, we're coming back to actually trying to, if you like, not only get the workforce behind this, we're flooding, if you like, the digital airways with pictures to encourage employees at other sites to actually go with the campaign, to carry the campaign, to lead the campaign. But they're not the only people who are seeing these pictures. Management's seeing these pictures. Yeah, we're constantly ensuring that the right people, that means the board of Siemens, are aware of what we're doing. Yeah? And in some levels, middle management, interesting enough, is behind us here. We got the support of middle management. Yeah, but we were using all the channels at our disposal, and we're quite lucky there. We're quite favored there. We don't only have the Works Council Act, we have the Co-Determination Act. So my boss, Jürgen Körner, is this second general secretary of the IG-Metall. I work directly for him. He sits on the supervisory board of Siemens, and he's very clever. He informs the industrial relations, or Arbeitsdirektor, so the industrial relations officer responsible for Siemens, constantly about what we're doing. He shows them WhatsApp messages about what we're doing and so forth. Yeah. What's interesting here is we said the workforce could show their commitment to this in doing two things. Firstly, participating in a questionnaire, which we use. And again, we're using digital tools here for this. Yeah. The second thing, which was really important here, not only were they showing their commitment to this campaign with this digital tool, they're also indicating to us what the main elements of the demand should be, what our demand should be. And we set a quite a low bar. Anybody who's done a questionnaire, if you get a 20 or 30% return on your questionnaire, you're usually very, very happy. Yeah. We're dealing with around 15,000 people, just under 14,000 something. Around about 11,000 of them are covered by the collective agreement. Yeah. We got over 8,000 employees up and down the country, from Kiel to Flensburg, participating in this questionnaire and telling us what their demands were. Yeah. When we got to that point, we knew we had something. Yeah. The campaign got legs. Yeah. It started to go beyond what we just had to keep bringing people together, making sure they were communicating. But the employees themselves took over this campaign, again, using digitalization. Next slide, Ronald. Okay, this is for me really interesting because this is my site, okay? The main site that I'm responsible for many different sites. I belong to the National IG-Metall team, even though I'm based in Erlangen, but I go from Berlin, Frankfurt. I'm everywhere. Hence, I didn't have much time to do my slides. But Erlangen is actually called the Niederlassung Mittelfranken. Yeah, we have around about 8,000 of the workforce in total is just over 1,000 employees. About 700 of those are covered by the collective agreement. 810 employees participated in this questionnaire. Yeah. If you just only consider employees covered by the collective agreement, we had more than 100%. I mean, it just blew us away. Yeah. Next slide, Ronald. Okay. Now we come to our demands. The word fordering is our demands, and we had 3 demands. Yeah. The first demand is that the 39 sites go into the Bavarian collective agreement, what is called the Fleckentarifvertrag. The other thing was that we wanted 35-hour week. Yeah. So the first point is actually looking at salaries. So actually moving away from this discrepancy between 10 and 20% difference in salaries. The other was a 35-hour week. And the last thing was to actually get rid of what is called the qualification hours. So each employee is required voluntarily in their private time to actually participate in further training courses. And that's what we wanted to address. So they were the 3 key demands that we had, yeah? Just another aside there, in terms of the 1,000 new members that we wanted, we topped that. We currently have nearly 1,500 new members. Yeah. And in my case, for example, I have an organization level which is way into double figures, which is quite unusual for Siemens. Yeah. Okay, next. Okay, so again, here's a couple of events we were using here. Again, we didn't totally jettison analog, the analog approach. You'll see on the left-hand side, these are employees who are responsible for the automation system in an area called F-Axig in Erlangen. It's a research and development center of Siemens. It's massive. It is the future of Siemens. And what we did here, we went, and here again, it's a great example. We took photos. Within an hour, we're flooding the digital waves with this picture showing the workforce committing to the postcard that I just showed you, which were the 3 demands. And again, we did the same thing here. Yeah, on the right-hand side, that was an early morning event from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock in the morning, where we were being overrun by people. Yeah, we're just setting up there, but I mean, people committed to this. Yeah. Next slides, Ronald. Okay, this postcard was also quite useful for us, again, because in Germany, works councils are allowed to hold 5 or 4 plant meetings, you would say in old terms, plant meetings a year. A Betriebsversammlung, that means where the whole of the workforce comes together. The idea was that each site would pass this postcard. Again, it's a little bit like the puzzle, yeah. 2 meters by 1.5 meters in this particular case. At the meeting, the IG-Metall is by German law allowed a spot, so that's where I come into it. That's my spot there. I wanted to pass this postcard to the local manager of the site. And what was interesting there, and it was, if you like, an own goal for them, they refused it. And we flooded. Yeah, we used every accessibility that we had to WhatsApp, making films and so forth, asking employees what they felt about the fact that the local management had refused to accept these demands. And that they played into us on that one. That was a major breakthrough for us. Okay, we're nearly there. Final slide, Ronald. So where are we at now? Okay. Where we're at now is that last week we had the annual general meeting. We had started negotiations in July last year. I'm trying to think, schleppend. They were not going as fast as we wanted. We felt that management was playing games with us a little bit. What we did here again, and this is a great way again, that we're not only flooding the digital airways with pictures, images, and narrative, if you like, a story which we're developing and telling, to get the workforce not only to commit to it, but to stay with the campaign. We've been running a campaign now for 1.5 years. But again, as I said, the most important thing was to show management that the employees are totally unamused by the current situation. And what we did here was, again, we used all the channels that we had available to us, supervisory level, the chairperson of the Joint Works Council, who is the vice president of the supervisory board, Birgit Steinborn, constantly on a day-to-day basis with the head of the Human Resource Management Department, and with Roland Bush, the CEO of Siemens. We informed them that if we didn't get an agreement or a commitment to an agreement before last week, it was the 12th of February, we would overtake, or we would actually flood the annual general meeting with questions from all our members up and down the country, why there was a two-class system when it comes to working time and pay within Siemens. Yeah, we have an agreement in terms of what is called, it's a typical thing, a paper signed by management and signed by Jürgen Körner, committed to actually addressing 4 points, and it gives us, if you like, we know where we're going, and we're very close to actually signing an agreement here. Okay, that was my part done. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was well, and Ronald. I mean, that was riveting. I think it just shows how poles apart the German system is from the British system in terms of everything, really, not least sophistication of communication and everything else. I have loads of questions of my own. However, I'd like to ask anybody present. Oh, there's some things in chat. I wonder whether there's any questions coming up in chat. Oh, no, that's Ronald. No, okay, great. There's no message. There's no actual questions in chat. So are there any questions from anybody attending? If so, put your hand up or just wave. Oh, right, Kevin.
Can you hear me, Michael?
Oh, hello, Kevin. Yes, great.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Yeah, that was brilliant, absolutely terrific. And it transposed me back about 50 years to hear both the British situation and also what's happening in Germany, which makes us all jealous. Because I wanted to come back and thank you to Michael and to Ronald for that presentation. It was really excellent. But I'd like to come back to John's presentation earlier because the Bullock report, Michael, as you will know, generated quite a lot of interest in Ireland, in the trade union in Ireland. The trade union movement in Ireland goes right back to the British unions in the 1890s, and gradually there was a divergence of directions, and in particular with joining the European Union. There was quite a lot of interest in the Bullock report and the ideas of board level representation and co-determination. And of course, there was a lot of employer opposition to that in Ireland, but it was decided to introduce legislation to have worker directors, as we call them, board level representatives in the state companies. And that was politically supported. I worked on it myself during my political career, and management of the state companies very much welcomed it. But there was an interesting change in the mid 1980s. There were two new one of the government departments was closed, and two new state companies were set up, the telecommunications company, Telecom, and the postal service, An Post. And each of those had 4 board level representatives selected by the employees on their new boards. 6 months later, a new state company, state forestry company, was set up, and there was no mention of board level representatives, or as we call them, worker directors. And since then, any state company that's been set up, there's been the whole political support for the idea just basically collapsed in the mid 1980s, which was tremendously disappointing for us who were promoting it. And it was further diminished. The system was further diluted by the fact that a lot of the state companies were then privatized. and lost their board level, lost their worker directors, like Aer Lingus, like the telecom company. And then during the financial crisis, a lot of the agencies, state agencies, who had board level representatives were closed. So we went from having over 80 board level representatives working within the system to down to now there's less than 30. So I'm still jealous of the fact that even with my work in the ETUI and your work, Michael, in the ETUI as well, to see how co-determination is still evolving, still a key aspect, key area in, for example, not just the German system, but other systems in the EU member states, whereas we're going the other way. So I'd just like to thank all three, and in particular John, for reminding me of that period in industrial relations history in Ireland.
Thank you, Kevin. There are other questions, but if I can just follow up on that, Kevin. You mentioned that the Irish system has come under a great deal of pressure and attack. And of course, you're absolutely right, because I wrote something about this myself. Can I just ask Ronald and Michael about the general election coming up in Germany in a few weeks' time, in fact, very soon? I remember when Angela Merkel became Chancellor back in, I think it was 2006, one of the first things she said was that the new CDU government would not make any attempts to alter the Mitbestimmung system in Germany. What would be the impact of a new German government in Germany? Is there any likelihood that a new CDU government in some form of coalition might begin to undermine the legislation on which the works councils and co-determination at the company level is based? Is there any chance of that? Has it become an election issue, or is it?
I think if Ronald, do you want to answer this?
You can take it. I'm still thinking because.
Okay, one of the things that I would say there is certainly from the CDU perspective is that one forgets that the CDU has a very, very strong employee-friendly wing of it. Yeah, so if you like, and that works as a balance against and any consideration which will be very prevalent within the Liberal Party to actually change the Works Constitution Act or to rework the Collective Bargaining Act. I'm not quite sure the elections themselves are going to have any major impact for us, but what will have a major impact for us, and this is something that I was talking about this week, I was involved in doing training for shop stewards from Erlangen, and part of the training was every 4 years we have Works Council elections, and the next Works Council elections takes place in 2026 between January and May. And one of the things that we're very concerned about, even within Siemens, and I've seen this in cases of being involved in shop stewards committees or events, and other events in Erlangen with the Siemens employees, we are very concerned that the AfD are putting up representatives to stand for the next Works Council in the next Works Council election. That is the biggest problem we have, not necessarily up and coming elections, unless that is Herr Merz should do would go form a coalition with the AfD, which is not going to happen. But then we will be very concerned, because if you actually look at the program of the AfD, they are very, very anti-trade union. They are very, very anti-co-determination.
Right. No, that's very helpful. And thanks for Kevin for raising that question. Oh, Ronald, yes, go on.
Just to add, as far as I can see, the whole election campaign and any party in Germany was extremely dominated by the migration question, and all other questions are in the background. And many commentators agree that the crucial election will be 29 in Germany. So this will be the election where it possibly the AfD will come into power. So it's upon the next 4 years, and then we'll see. And yeah, the rest is I agree with Mike.
Ronald is well placed to say that as he's Austrian.
Right. Okay.
By origin, yeah.
Well, 2029 will be the next date of the general election in Britain, when who knows what Nigel Farage will do. Let's leave that to one side because that's too depressing. We've had a written question from Jerome, which I shall read out. But did anybody else is indicating? Howard, were you? Yes, okay. Let's take Jerome's question first. Did you want to read it out yourself, or shall I do it? He says, may I ask Michael and Ronald why they think the campaign has impacted and caused such interest amongst Siemens workers? It's a question in chat.
Yeah, okay. I suppose that's a question directed to me because I
sure.
address the campaign. Without a doubt, works councils and shop stewards committees have started to discover that actually, if you use social media, it can be a force of empowerment. Yeah. The other thing is, and this goes back to the basic concept of organising. We've talked about this in the last few days that I've been with shop stewards. You need a conflict situation to actually achieve something, and ultimately, the emphasis of the campaign that we had were things like, and we plastered this all over workplaces, and we spoke to employees about this. This two-class system, enough is enough. It's simple wording. Yeah, it's very simple wording. Yeah. But my job is, I'm a rabble rouser. That's my job. Yeah. I go to meetings and I then say to the, and I'm sure John's done this the same. I say to the personnel manager afterwards, don't take that personally, but that's my job. Yeah. And I say to the workforce, and I do this all the while, even though it's not Christmas. I say, Mr. Bush is not Father Christmas. He's not going to give you anything. We're talking about a political what's auseinandersetzung, a political struggle here. And if you want if you want to achieve the introduction of the 35-hour week 21 years after it's actually successfully fought for, 31 years, you're going to do it yourself. You're going to have to do it yourself. And here it's difficult because, as I said, the emphasis is we understood that it's very difficult to get white collar workers with the exception of the public sector in Germany, like most countries, onto the streets. But we can actually get them to actually, as in the department, to have a photo holding the postcard with the demands or the puzzle that we had. They're willing to do that. And that is a form of, if you like, it's a modern form of virtual strike, yeah, or conflict.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks.
Sorry.
I just want to say thanks, Michael. Thanks, Ronald. Fascinating story and fascinating insight into the campaign. It was great to see it. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you. Howard.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay. That was really, really excellent. A couple of comments and questions, one on Siemens and one to John on the UK. So on Siemens, the story there, if I understand it, correct me if I got this wrong, but this is an attempt to convert or add to a single employer works council agreement, to develop that into or add to it a single employer collective bargaining agreement. Now, if that is the objective, then the move towards single employer collective bargaining has certain real positives, but equally, when you look at that historically, countries where there has been a move to single employer bargaining have been ones where, following on that, there is a reduction in collective bargaining overall. And I'm thinking historically of the UK or of Sweden. Now, So there are negative externalities. The question to John, very nice historical overview, John, as I would have expected, is one thing you sort of left out was the 2004 information and consultation regulations brought in by the new Labour government. Now, John Purcell and Mark Hall did a whole book on them entitled Much Ado About Nothing. And I suppose the question, John, was it too little too late? And why did that come to nothing? Was it too little too late? Was there not the demand there on the part of employees? And was there not the capability on the part of trade unions to take advantage of the regulations?
Who wants to go first? John?
Do you want me to respond to that, Michael?
Yeah, please go.
Well, I mean, first of all, a small procedural point. We have, as part of this series of lectures, had actually a session on those particular regulations and what happened.
Okay.
So I deliberately swerved round them for the sake of avoiding too much repetition. But I wanted to focus on works councils anyway, for partly for the reasons that I said in my talk, but also because in that very, very interesting discussion about what's happening in Siemens, I didn't have a little clickometer thing to count how many times Michael mentioned works councils, but it was several dozen times. And it seemed to me to be a wonderful demonstration how the existence of works councils gives another set of opportunities, another set of arguments, another set of organising positions. Okay, the position hasn't always, as Ronald said, the position hasn't always been used with great facility, but the fact of the matter is the opportunities there are very considerable. And just a last word about the omission. One of the problems we had with the new regulations about consultation and so on, international consultation, were there was no infrastructure in place. Had we had something approaching a works council system, there would have been a bridge which we could take people over, where we're talking about working across large groups with even non-unionists, but with confronting, sometimes working with, sometimes confronting employers. I think works councils are actually quite a good training for that. We had none of it. Of course, because of the change of culture that was being suggested, there were only a couple of British trade unions who took those things seriously. And they did quite well, quite interestingly. But I think that when we talk about filling gaps in our own industrial relations system, we better start from the bottom and work our way up. So very, very interesting, Howard. And I was, if we can get a piece of script of based on what Michael was saying, I will count up the number of times works councils were mentioned. My guess is over 50.
Yeah. Michael and Ronald, do you have anything to add?
Ronald, do you want to start?
Okay, I guess it's your turn.
Okay. Coming to what Howard said, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding there, Howard, which is a failure on my part, obviously, to explain myself succinctly enough. And that was what we're considering here is that 75% of the Siemens workforce currently are members of the regional collective agreement. We call them national collective agreements because they're very similar in many ways, but they are based, they are negotiated at the regional level. We have actually 7 regions. The region where I'm based in is Bavaria. What we're trying to do is move away from this company collective agreement, which the TIFA-SVAL, Tarifvertragssondervereinbarung, represents. So that's the opposite thing. I'm very conscious that this is a history program, and and one has to consider, and I think we forget this very often, but in 1952, when the Works Constitution Act was passed, the DGB and most of the trade unions at the time called it a very dark day in the history of German trade unionism, because the Adenauer government set up works councils to actually compete with works councils. So we forget, so with trade unions, we forget that. Yeah, we forget that. Yeah. We're quite lucky because there are still key aspects within the Works Constitution Acts which reference works trade unions very often. That makes our life a little bit easy. But if you like, the quid pro quo arrangement that we have here is that in addition to our shop stewards committees, the works councils very often are on our side because we are able to actually get members there, and they represent us, and they, if you like, they feed into the workforce what the narrative is coming from the IG-Metall. And on the opposite thing is we're a resource for them in the way that we're able to put campaigns like this together. But the most important factor here in any question of power relations, and that is, we are very informed. Yeah, and so, for example, just give an example here. Michael, it's reiterated. I come from industrial relations background. Sociology degree, studied in Kiel with Steve Jeffers, Dave Leiden, Roger Seifert. Then went on to John Leopold and Brian Towers. They were and so I have an academic background, and I focus very much on German industrial relations. I was headhunted 1.5 years ago by the IG-Metall, and I've started from zero because the theory and practice are 2 different worlds. And the main thing that I've struggled with is German labor law. And that's what is expected of me. And that's what most of my colleagues, and I'm, if you like, I always say that my glass is a third full after 1.5 years, and it's not getting any fuller. But I'm a source we make ourselves, if you like, irreplaceable for the Works Council, and that's the way we get them on board. But ultimately, one should never forget that the Works Constitution Act was set up as a way of undermining the power of trade unions. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Ronald? It's up to you. No. Are there any further questions? I mean, I'd like to ask one of my own. I think it's probably directed at Ronald. Michael, you gave a very graphic and vivid account of the way digitalization and social media can be used to generate a campaign in the case of Siemens and IG-Metall. Coming back specifically to the question of works councils, works councils have under German law 3 main functions: information, consultation, co-determination. And I'm wondering if in your research you found that the process of digitalization has different impacts on each of those 3 different functions. I mean, for example, in the case of information, I can see that the use of digitalization can be used very efficiently to spread information, both from amongst works councillors themselves, but particularly from management, who, for example, wants to introduce a new change in something, can inform the works councillors and indeed employees very easily. It's a question of information. I mean, it's quite a simple process. When you come to consultation, and specifically co-determination, which after all allows the process of veto, I'm trying to get my head around how digitalization actually works then, because you have, again, 2 different sets of relationships. One is between works councillors themselves. Well, actually 3. There's works councillors amongst themselves and the way they communicate, and may themselves consult on how to consult. There's the question of members liaising with their works councillors and how they get that through, specifically in relation to consultation, co-determination. But then, of course, also the question of works councillors and in management. If you could, because I mean, you made this very interesting distinction between traditional companies and the kind of digital companies. I can see there that if you are a digital native, some of this comes to you, a younger person particularly, is able to get their heads around a lot of the digital paraphernalia that's going on. I mean, some of us of a certain age find it much, much more difficult. And I'm wondering also whether there's an age issue here, whether possibly older works councillors are just struggling more than their younger colleagues, and whether that's an issue at all. I mean, I speak as somebody who struggles a lot myself, and I'm just wondering how I would fare, having been a trade union representative myself in a very analog world. I'm just wondering how I would deal with digitalization in terms of all these very, very complex systems of relationships involving information, consultation, co-determination. I'm sorry, it's a very rambling question. Try and make of it what you will, and anything you can say, I'm sure, will be more than useful. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. It's quite a complex, more than a question, but I wouldn't say. First of all, the data we've gathered is pre-COVID-19. So this first, I would say that many things have changed in this few years, even in terms of people getting familiar with using digital communication tools. But I wouldn't say that it is a question of a generational question at the first hand. It's more a question of, let's say, institutionalized logics of communications. So if I'm a works council member and I'm getting elected for the first time into a works council, then I get to know a specific culture of a works council. And this includes how the works council communicates, so who to ask for what topic and in what way and what manner. And this is more or less a cultural question, but it's also a technical question. So, and I encountered works council members during my observations whose primary strategy was to say, okay, if I want to be present for my workforce, I have to go to the shop floor. So I have to be present at the shop floor. And one occasion I asked the works council member, okay, and how many persons are you responsible for? How many employees? And he says something like 2,000. And then I asked him, okay, and how many times a year do you see each employee at the workforce? And he couldn't answer the question. So, but he didn't rely on digital communication tools because it was a different logic of communicating with people. He needed, in his logic, in his experience, and he needed to see in a kind of representational thinking, at least one or two people, and then in his mind or in his mind. This would ensure communication, and he couldn't imagine that communication also works if you are communicating with an anonymous crowd. So I would say, I'm not quite clear, I'm sure if it's clear, but I would say it's more a question of culture than a question of the generation. So.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Yes, that's a very helpful answer. Sarah has her hand up. Sarah?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Very, very good presentations, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and especially fascinating insights into the German system. Yeah. Some people here know that I worked at the TUC in the UK for a long time. I was head of the Equality and Employment Rights Department there. And under my watch, as it were, we had to deal with the transposition of the Information and Consultation Directive into UK law. And I have to say, it was pretty much of a train crash. To be honest, there was nobody, the government wasn't interested in it at all. This was Labour government getting rather tired, I suspect. The TUC tried to be enthusiastic about it, and we saw it exactly as John Edmonds said earlier on, as a kind of bridge. It was the second rung towards more formal recognition arrangements that you could open up on the back of it in workplaces where employers have been refusing to deal with trade unions or recognise trade unions. But the problem was that the employers in the UK didn't want it at all. They were utterly hostile to the concept of any kind of legislation on consultation. And that was, I think, unanimous. I don't think there were any employers who were genuinely interested. Their main purpose in this was to sabotage it. And what they did was they persuaded the government to introduce it with a whole series of hoops and triggers and percentage mechanisms, just as they have with the statutory trade union recognition system. And so, for example, a trade union, if they wanted to use this as a bridge to get a better foothold in an unrecognised workplace where there wasn't an organised trade union presence, they had to establish that 10% of the workforce in the entire undertaking would be in favour of some sort of formal system. Well, to go in, they'd have no access to the workplace. So to try and first of all determine what the undertaking comprised was difficult often, because companies are complicated and they often say, well, actually, you've left out the whole of the, the south coast, and we've got 14 operations down there. So you're looking at the wrong undertaking. So there'd be all these kind of objections from employers. And then when the union said, well, we've got the 10% support, the employer would say, well, you're counting in people who are agency workers, and who are you talking to, and where's the data, and we don't believe all this. So the whole thing just collapsed really in a welter of suspicion, employers not wanting to play the game at all. And I have to be absolutely honest about this. We have very little interest from trade unions. And I suppose the question to anyone who to me is maybe a rhetorical question, is why is it that UK workers generally are not enthusiastic about engaging in these things? Really, they'll if they're in trade unions, they'll work with the trade unions. The trade unions are happy with that to an extent, and many of them don't really want to have to deal with this question of, are you going to represent or involve non-trade union members? So I end really on a very cynical note. I just don't think this is ever going to take on in the UK labour market. I can see why the TUC is now pushing really hard for sectoral level collective bargaining underpinned in statute, because that does give them a much better in. And I suppose, I don't know whether our German colleagues here have followed the sort of fascinating path of the development of the Employment Relations Bill at the moment, the Employment Bill. But what is the alternative to the systems that you have in Germany, not more akin to some kind of sectoral level collective bargaining efforts without all the panoply of stuff that you have on co-determination? I mean, it's a kind of a middle way again, I suppose. That's a very muddled question, but it's just some thoughts I've had about, in the UK, the relative failures of any kind of attempt to have legislation or systems codified that operate like yours do in Germany. And I don't really know where you go from there. I think probably sectoral level collective bargaining across, say, the cleaning sector, some of the service sectors, might be a better way of achieving some sort of stronger union presence across some of these industries. But it won't do anything to break into, high-tech industries and the new areas of commerce that there are in the UK that are completely ununionized. So there we are. I kind of despair in a way. But
well, Sarah, that's interesting, because Gareth has left a note in chat. With two parts of it, really. One, it actually links to some of the points you're making. Did I see on the slides only 10% of German workforces today captured by works councils? Is there any realistic prospect of that decline being reversed? So, I mean, one part of the question is, all right, do you have a legal basis? But on the other hand, is that legal basis being actually implemented? Does it have an effect? And then he adds, doesn't that mean that we shouldn't seek to embrace works councils, but rather he cautions the degree of impact they might be having if they were introduced into the UK? And then on the other hand, he puts another point that he can see the appeal for white-collar workforces, that more traditional work union organisations rather lost its way. I mean, again, kind of a whole series of points there, really. But I mean, I think that the 2 points that come out of that, and also out of Sarah's question, is first of all, whether having a legal basis it's not in itself enough, because it's a question of how it's implemented and enforced. So in the case of the UK, as Sarah's just reminded us, the ICE regulations never took off at all anyway. And in Germany, the implementation of the law is clearly losing its impact gradually. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, what impact would they have in the UK anyway? I mean, these are huge questions, but perhaps if you've got any final comments, because we are coming to the end now, people are kind of drifting away a little bit. I think we need to wrap up fairly soon, but maybe this is the opportunity to ask you for your final comments. I mean, unless there's other questions from the rest of you, if there are no other questions coming out, maybe I can ask John, Michael, and Ronald just to kind of finish with some thoughts around these issues. I mean, in alphabetical order, it's John first, if you don't mind.
In alphabetical order. I mean, the difficulties are obvious. I mentioned some of them. I went through some of the, in preparing for this, went through some of the times when there was an opportunity for change in Britain.
Yeah.
But the establishments killed it. And mainly the establishment was working either directly as representing industry, employers in industry, or politically representing them. So it is very difficult, but no one's doubting that. The problem is, though, that the system we have at the moment has this gaping great hole in it. We don't have the opportunity of getting to grips with what employers are trying to do. We don't even have the opportunities on many occasions to find out what they're going to do until it's far too late to do it. So if not works councils, if not some general legal obligation to consult, then what is there? Because I share Sarah's frustration, but there has to be an answer. And we've never pressed hard on this button. The button might have been there in the early 2000s, but we all walked past, blowing our nose and forgetting the button. We ought perhaps to put ourselves together and see if it's worth having a real go at this, because just because employers don't like it doesn't make it impossible, fortunately. So we ought to try.
Yes, thank you. Michael and Ronald, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah, loads. Where to begin? we could.
That's up to you.
We could sit here for hours. I mean, I found Sarah's comments very, very interesting, and I'd say two things there, which I think are quite pertinent. One is that it's a fallacy to think that German management loves works councils. Okay, it's a fallacy. Yeah. I remember doing a project a couple of years ago with the university from Leuven, and it was a European project which we were given the task to actually question what management thinks of social dialogue, which is just another term for social partnership, if you like. And off the record, they quite clearly were saying that we can live without them, but they exist, so we deal with them. Yeah. That's one thing to do. And the other thing to do is, and I think this is really important, and I can recommend, some of you probably know him personally, have heard of him, Volker Teljohan, German researcher, lived in Italy for many, many years, has done some great work for the IG-Metall in trying to sell the concept of social partnership to the Italian trade unions. And one of the things that he does it, and this is something which is, again, a misinterpretation outside of Germany of what social partnership is. The real term which you should use, and it's something that Müller-Jensch created, and that's conflict partnership. Yeah, that's the real thing. Yeah. Now I know myself that British trade unions are suspect of works councils and works councils because they think they're the extended arm of personnel departments, and in some cases they are. I mean, I even have that within the Siemens world, and they are. But in those where you have a very strong shop steward committee, where you have a works council which has people who have good connections to the IG-Metall. Social partnership doesn't describe what works councils do. They are far more conflictual than actually textbooks analysis of German industrial relations are actually portray them to be. Yeah. So I do accept some of Sarah's sort of observations there, but it's about understanding that works councils have been trade unions have been quite good in actually steering works councils in the direction they need to go. And I think it's going to be this notion of conflict partnership is going to become even greater, because John raised a big issue. He was talking about climate change. It's a big issue in Germany. You know, the Ukrainian war has shown that, but it's also a question of inequality. You know, because it's not only about transforming to a more cleaner environment, it's whether everybody can afford that. And that's something that we're actually addressing as a trade union. You know, it has to be equitable in the changes, the transformations that we're taking, both in terms of energy, but also the digital transformation. It has to be equitable. And in that way, works councils have a big role to play, and they will be more conflictual. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Just totally agree with Michael. Just to add, I don't know if any one of you is familiar with the works of Andreas Reckwitz, German cultural sociologist. He published also in English a book in 2020 called Sociology of Singularities, where he describes kind of societal development where the particular gets more important or a value on its own in contrast to the general. And if you want to speak of interest or collective interests, you need an understanding of the general. And this is, if we have a, like what's called a singularized society, it's getting harder and harder to tell people or the workforce or employees that their particular interests are not that important or not of that relevance. So, and the campaign of Michael, I would say, is a perfect example for how campaigning and bargaining can work. You need a concrete conflict. So first of all, that's a kind of, you need it. And then you have to be fast. Either if you're a union or the works councils or anything else, then you have to be fast. And then that's the only kind of lever, I would say, where to get some things going. So
okay.
To enforce your interest.
Yes. Well, I think on that note, we've probably come to an end. And this is absolutely.
I just have one more thing.
Please, Michael. Yes, go on.
Okay, and I think this is quite a pertinent point. What we're doing, and people have said this, and I've come across this in my last research was looking at the collective bargaining landscape in East Germany with Ingrid Artus, someone you know quite well, Michael.
Oh, yes, I do.
Ingrid and I worked on a project together. And the term came up in that project, and it's coming up on a day-to-day basis in what we're doing here. And basically what people are saying is that what we're participating is back to the roots trade unionism. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's actually, builds on what Ronald was saying. It's back to the roots, trade unionism, using the digital tools that we have at our disposal.
Sure. Yes, thumbs up from John. I think on that positive note, Michael, I think it's probably time to draw to an end. Can I just give 3 votes of thanks? First of all, to all of you for coming and for participating. Secondly, particularly to Philip and to the team who organised the technology behind this, because without that, we wouldn't have a seminar. So that is not forgotten, Philip, and please extend my thanks to everybody involved. But of course, also to John, Michael and Ronald for their really outstanding contributions. I think very, very thought-provoking, very provocative in the best sense. That given a great deal to think about, and certainly I'm much more better informed than I was particularly on Germany. and the role of social media and digitalization in relation to trade union campaigning and Works Council's activities. I think it's very, very interesting indeed. We shall look forward to your book when it comes out. You said it's going to be out later on this year. I don't know what the title will be, but when it's out, please let us know. If you send a note to me, I will make sure that it's publicised as much as I can, because I'm going to be the first in the queue to buy it, I can tell you. I think it's going to be fascinating. So congratulations on that.